Other folks, Wrel here from the future. You're going to be watching an interview from back in November between myself and the Stephanie Ann podcast. Enjoy.
Welcome, friends and fellow entrepreneurial teachers. Today, I am joined by a longtime friend and fellow entrepreneurial teacher, Michael Henderson. Michael is a professional YouTube content creator and a games industry veteran that is currently developing a new tabletop role-playing system. So, as a quick framing question for our audience, Michael, what do you love to teach and to share with others?
I really like to help people create things. Yeah, the act of creation itself brings me much joy. And if I can push a little bit more of that into the world and inspire others, then it's all good.
Perfect. All right. So now the big question, how did you end up here doing this entrepreneurial thing?
Okay, so I have to skip around a little bit to ignore some of the more boring bits. But basically, while I was in the Navy back in, I think around 2011, I started building up a YouTube channel, and that grew to around 80,000 subscribers at its peak. That was done over the course of 4 years. And it eventually landed me a job in the games industry itself. So at that point, I moved on, like building out a game, and eventually wound up being creative director for that game. And the YouTube channel was built primarily like around content that focused on the game that I ended up creating. So circle back around, 7 years after that, I leave the games industry. Well, okay, I don't want to say that I'm gone from the games industry, but I left that particular job and am now building something of my own. Just working on a tabletop role playing system that is like totally fresh. It's for people who really enjoy Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, uh, those nerdy sort of activities. And uh, I'm using basically some of the knowledge and the community that I've built up over time to help rally support around this particular project because it's challenging, scary to do something that you've never done before. So I'm starting over, doing the entrepreneurial thing from scratch again.
All right, I feel like you glossed over and made a lot of that journey sound a lot simpler than it actually is. So my first follow-up question to that is uh, why? What compelled you to be willing to dive into something as entrepreneurial and with such a low probability of success? Like there's a lot of really successful people on YouTube that manage to make a living from it, but there are way more people on the long tail that never get anywhere. So what made you decide to be willing to try something like that, or what in your life inspired you to be willing to dive in to something entrepreneurial like that?
So one of the things that I feel very strongly about, anybody who has known me for a long time knows that I just like to make things. I like to create. And while I was in the Navy, I was laid up for a long time because the funniest way to say it is that my intestines exploded, and so I was on a limited duty command, working at the public affairs office on Navy submarine base New London, in Groton, Connecticut. And during that time, I was a photojournalist. Basically, I was making or taking pictures, writing stories, and like shepherding celebrities around the base to see the submarines and that sort of thing. Uh, but one thing that I was experimenting with was doing reviews on video games. Back like in the newspaper, I would play a game, write an article about it, and then kick that out to the public. And uh, I ended up I was doing some experimentation with YouTube at the same time. Originally, it was just personal stuff. Like I was making some stuff in like Warcraft 3 forever ago, some doing some modding and that sort of thing, and I just wanted a place to hold my ideas. and eventually started creating with a little bit more intention because I was very passionate. I love video games. I'm I'm a super mega video game nerd, and putting that stuff on YouTube was just like a fun hobby. But then it became a little bit more than a hobby. And my dad has actually mentioned to me that a hobby becomes your job when it starts taking up more time than your job. So uh, it was a slow going, building a community, but I focused on what could help people, and kind of made that a part of my identity in the YouTube space. And it pulled in, like I helped a lot of new players get acclimated with the game that I was centering content around at the time, and it just kind of grew from there. Eventually, garnered attention, but I get like I make this sound like a hobby, but at one point I was grinding, 12-hour days and like working on the weekends. When you're doing something new on your own, because eventually I got out of the Navy and I was kind of on my own. I think I was going to college at the same time at some point, and it's a lot of work in doing, and yeah, so that's where the grind comes in. That's where the entrepreneurial side of things comes in. But eventually, I get a break and get interviewed by uh, people on Planetside 2, which was my game of choice, and it became them eventually. After having me do some contract work for them, I ended up flying out to California, interviewing proper, and eventually wound up moving out there to pursue a proper career in the games industry. And over time, 7 years later, I've learned a lot, met a lot of people, and created a lot of really cool stuff.
Awesome. And it sounds exactly like one of Cal Newport's books called So Good They Can't Ignore You, where basically you did the work. You showed up day after day doing the best job that you could and continuing to learn and grow. And it got to the point where you were literally so good that the Planet Side 2 community and company couldn't ignore the work that you were doing, and they got drawn into it. So that's a really good book, by the way, for anyone listening. So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, and it's exactly the story that you just shared. Okay, so I have a candy question for you. What's the most or who is the most interesting person that you got to meet as a photographer before we move on to the more serious conversation?
That's a good question. It's there were I can't remember anybody's names. So yeah, I think one of the things that I'm most happy with is that I got to take pictures of um, President Barack Obama at the time when he was addressing the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, which it's from a distance. I was just in the crowd with everybody else, using some deep zoom lens, and but that made me really happy in that moment.
And you also won an award for your photography, right?
For photojournalism, or rather, I think it was specifically for like the Thomas and Jefferson Award for writing something or another. I don't know that stuff. I'm unfazed by it. It's fine, cool thing, but it's material.
All right. So now back to the real story here. So I think what I find most fascinating about your story is you've seen both sides of it. So you've done an entrepreneurial thing. Well, actually, in part of it you've done twice, but you took an entrepreneurial thing and turned it into a day job. And now you're at this place where you accumulated a certain amount of cushion from the day job so that you could then dive back into the entrepreneurial world and kind of take that leap and risk. So we'll start with the first side, the YouTube, and you talked about it a little bit, but YouTube is the wild west. It is very hard to figure out how to be successful and to get noticed. So what would be if someone's trying to do what you managed to do, because 80,000 subscribers is nothing to sneeze at. How are you able to do that successfully? So, and how likely is this path for others? What tips or tricks or focuses or ways of thinking would you suggest to if someone's trying to enter into the YouTube space, in the gaming industry? But if there are things that connect to just larger YouTube world, that would be cool too.
You know what's interesting is that the landscape has changed a lot during my time um, in the games industry. So I'm not even sure that a lot of my more specific advice would be relevant anymore. Um, so back in the day, it'd be like, okay, this is how many videos you need to do. This is the consistency. This is the time that you post them. These are what your thumbnails need to look like. These are the styles of videos that resonate with people. But nowadays, a lot of that stuff has changed. I think it's important to remember that everybody and their mother has a podcast or a YouTube channel, uh, and some people's mothers are funnier than you are. It's smarter, just working harder, even. So you have to figure out what your identity is and how you can stand out. And then I think that there's some methods that I haven't explored nowadays where people can become very successful very quickly by luck. But luck is never something that you can rely on. So the thing that you have to rely on is your intention and believing in what you're doing and being consistent about it.
So a lot of YouTube is really just like, I don't know, injecting dopamine into our heads. It's almost like crack. But I your videos, I don't think were in that kind of style of the YouTubers shouting and squawking as they play through the game. So that's where the entrepreneurial teaching really came in. So what tell us a little bit about the types of videos that you created and how that got attention, how that benefited the community.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Um, I have this reservation with doing like clickbaity stuff, and it just drives me nuts. I feel like I need to have more integrity than that. Which at the same time, I feel is like, if people are trying to be successful on YouTube, humans are really easy to get to, like, click on things. But like, does the content actually have value? Are you putting something worth putting out into the world? So there are two main categories that I really tried to push with my videos. One was giving details about the game, so weapon reviews. I got known for doing long form content in that respect, but more importantly, that I would do a lot of videos helping acclimate new players to the game. So for Planetside 2 in particular, hey, this is how you can become better at it. And here are some like specific things that you may not have known, um, to help people enjoy their game. But the videos that I was personally most satisfied with, and I think probably resonated some of the most with my broader community, were the Thoughts on Better Gaming series, where it took a look at video games and how we can glean lessons from it to take with us in life. And it's kind of like a philosophical exploration of how video games connect uh, with us in real life. And I think that a lot of people really were interested in that sort of thing, and I don't see it all that often. So it seemed like a pretty good place to build where there wasn't too much competition either. Not that I was looking at it from that perspective, but in retrospect, it's something to think about.
Yeah, it sounds like you naturally fill the gap in the market. And I know that at being somewhat familiar with the work that you did, you also were filling a gap within the game. Because from what you've told me in the past, PlanetSide 2 is kind of tricky to onboard with. So that was a huge focus of helping new players get into the game. So it sounds like just naturally you had that entrepreneurial vision of being able to identify a problem that a community is having and then turn that into a solution that you can offer. So do you remember specifically some of the videos where you connected, video games to life? Are there any that stand out in your memory?
It's been so long since I've made one, because my channel was practically abandoned for, a good 5 plus years. But, um, I think I'm gonna struggle with this question, but if anybody has an interest, there is a playlist on the YouTube channel that they can check out.
And what is that YouTube channel?
YouTube.com/warpathrel, which is a mouthful, but I'm sure we'll put a link in the show notes.
Yes. Yeah. And Wrel is Wrel, correct? Yeah. And
That's
where does
right.
that name come from?
Yeah, people have an obsession with asking about this, but really it's just I I liked the sound of it. It doesn't come from anywhere in particular. Uh, it just the kind of the harshness of some of the letters, and the softness of others, combined with the how short and memorable it is, was something that stuck with me for whatever reason.
Yeah, no, and that sounds like it speaks to the fact that you just enjoy crafting things, and creatively, and just kind of teasing out the beauty in whatever it is. So we've talked enough about the past. So now what's the work that you're doing currently? What is this entrepreneurial venture that you are on?
So currently, I'm developing Distal RPG, which is a high fantasy, class heavy, D20 based tabletop role playing system for people who like Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. It started as a hobby, actually a side project more like, because I had already left the games industry, and it actually distracted me a lot from other work that I was doing. I was trying to develop an indie game by myself, and that was actually going fairly well. But then I ended up hitting a reset button on some things, and it kind of like bogged me down, and I had to start again, um, with certain aspects of it. But at the same time, like all throughout that, I was working on this uh, fun game to play with friends, the tabletop one, since my friend group plays a lot of D&D, as you're well aware, uh, and it it got to the point where I was investing a lot of time into it, and I was feeling more satisfied with the work that I was doing. There was definitely that instant gratification of being able to write words on paper and immediately to see how they would influence the game. So I continued down that path instead and kind of put my game project on the back burner. And now it's released in alpha, so still very much in development. Um, but we have a community of more than 100 people in our Discord at the moment, and it gets continued updates, and that's where the majority of development is taking place, is within the Discord itself.
All right, I have a couple of questions after that, but I'll ask the nuts and boltsy one first. How, because I know this is relatively new for you. How have you pulled in 100 people already? Because again, building a Discord channel, everyone and their mother is doing that currently, it feels like. So how have you been able to bring people in? Where are you finding the interested people?
So I made it known that I was working on this project on my YouTube channel, and despite it not being the content that they're accustomed to, again, my channel has been abandoned for like 5 years. So if people were there for Planetside 2 content in particular, that stopped a long time ago. So I'm trying to pivot that channel, which is, I'll say right up front, it's very difficult for anyone to pivot a channel from one topic to another. But fortunately, the the people in my Discord are also a lot of the subscribers to that channel who have converging interests with, some of them are tabletop, RPG players. Others just want to support me as a person and want to see where what I'm able to accomplish and feel a part of that, because they're lending their own support. So I think that's where the seed of people comes in. it only took, I think it was a couple weeks, 2 weeks for to reach that amount, but at this point, I think that I've gotten most of the interested, parties, which compared to 80,000 subscribers is kind of a low, amount, so you're swinging pretty wide, but now it's about rebuilding again, and starting over is something that I'm excited and also terrified about. So,
Yeah. Okay. Again, my head is kind of exploding with questions. But I think that goes back to that, being so good they can't ignore you. If you've built that trust and you've had that integrity with your channel, now if you say this new thing has captured my attention, the people that have grown to know, like, and trust you are going to say, oh, well, if he's interested in that, then I'm interested in at least checking out where it's going. So I think having that consistency, and I am far from a YouTube anything. I know almost nothing about YouTube, but what I do know is that consistency is still really important to building, which you had mentioned earlier. I think a lot of the things that you mentioned when you were talking about how you built up your YouTube channel, I think a lot of those things are still very relevant. It may have shifted exactly what the specific answers were, but I think those types of things, having a thumbnail that catches people attention, and all of those different things are still super relevant. So going back to your pivots from where you were working on an indie game and switching to this, I have a question that is very hard to answer and that I think every entrepreneur struggles with. How do you know the difference between a distraction and a worthwhile pivot? How do you know when the resistance is winning and you're allowing yourself to go down a rabbit hole so you don't have to do the hard work, versus having that light bulb idea that's going to actually turn into something that could be more equally useful to the project that you're sort of kind of avoiding or pivoting away from?
I'm gonna lay out the personal goal for even having a side project at all, and that's that I wanted to create something. I wanted, like, a creative release valve for in between other stuff that I was doing. After leaving the games industry, I I was super burnt out, and I needed to recover. So my
And just to clarify, you were in a leadership position. So not only were you working on the game, you were responsible for the game, correct?
oh, very much, yes.
Yeah. And as creative director was your
It is
end
the
title.
official title, but I was also essentially the executive producer, there toward the end, and yeah, there's a long story, a 7-year story behind that, but it's yeah, eventually between doing the work, managing all the people, and continuing to keep developing, what is now actually, as of 2 days ago, that game is now 11 years old. So it is, a very old title with a strong community. But yeah, so between that, I was kind of done. You needed a break to recover. So my recovery activities were to do something new, just like create stuff for myself where I could take all of the energy and ideas that I had and funnel them into something that makes me happy. So to that end, it it's already a success. Like I've done it. I'm there. But to push it further, uh, understanding whether or not it's just to get back to your question, a distraction or not, I think is it's a little bit difficult to. I think it'd be monetary. Like if I continued down the path of building my own video game as an independent developer, I would totally make more money than if I'm building a tabletop RPG from scratch. And the reasons for it are very simple. What I was creating is or am currently creating with Distal is something that already has a very competitive, very well known, like saturated market. And there are also a lot of other people who are creating their own tabletop role playing games at the same time, people who have more clout in the industry and have way more experience and communities that have kind of built to support that endeavor. I don't have any of that. I'm starting from scratch. So I would say out the gate, it is not a good idea what I am doing. It is reckless. Please do not do this. Uh, but at the same time, I am comforted knowing that I have, like, I know where I'm going to end up if I fail. So creating that, or rather understanding where your safety net is super helpful to uh, set aside doubts about what you should be doing. Because sometimes it's worth just taking a chance and seeing, where you end up. And that's kind of where I'm at right now.
And it is so important as an entrepreneur to make sure that you're paying attention to the numbers and the reality, especially when you're on the creative side or the heart-based side. You can get really sucked into all the good that you're doing and the connections that you're making. But if on the back end, it doesn't actually turn into money, then you have to do something. You can't have a business if you don't have a revenue, because you have to be able to pay for that business. So I think what you touched on there is really important for all entrepreneurs to stay aware of, is the fact that you cannot ignore the bank account. And that's actually something Joe Polish, who's a marketer and just amazing networker. He's written several books, and he also has a large community called the Genius Network, which is a mastermind where you have to write a $25,000 check just to get in the door for a year. Yeah, you have to be able to just write the check right then and there to be able to participate. But he talks about, very specifically for entrepreneurs, one of the things that you always do as the leader is handle the money, and that means being real about the money. So he was talking of it from the perspective of having someone steal $2 million from him within his business because he trusted them and stopped paying attention. But on the smaller scale, it's making sure that the numbers line up. And I think that safety net thing that you talked about is a really valuable place to start from. So when you decided to make this transition from a day job to taking the leap again, you had a cushion. You know exactly how long you can go. And then you also know that you have rapport within the game industry to where you can move back into that if you need to. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, like I'm in some entrepreneurial subreddits, and it's all these people being like, should I invest my life savings in this thing? And it's like, no, or maybe, but what's your backup plan? What are you going to do if it doesn't work out? How much time do you have before the clock runs out? So I think that balance, especially for creatives, is super important to stay aware of. So now back to your game. Who would love Distal RPG? What is it built for? Because I know you have particular reasons that you felt compelled to create it, things that you like about D&D and things that you don't. So who would love to play Distal?
I think anybody who enjoys Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons and also is interested in trying something different. And that is not a great, like a targeted niche. It is, I mean, you'd have to reach the people who are kind of like fed up with D&D. I think would be probably a stronger approach. But I love D&D. I There are balance issues maybe, but it's fun every time I play. So I don't want to compete specifically with that. At the same time, I know that in some ways that's what's happening. And as will be most of the tabletop RPGs that others are creating at the moment. So again, this is one of those things where it's just like, don't do what I'm doing. Start if I wanted to approach this again, and if I had a goal of creating a new tabletop role playing game that was meant to be a commercial success, start with a niche. Do something very specific. There are games that are like, hey, do you want to be a pirate in a dark fantasy adventure and you just want to do that? That's that exists. If you want to uh, play in a world of Lovecraftian, actually like Nordic fantasy horror, but also in the 60s. I can't remember. In Europe, like very specific. Yeah, you play Vaesen. Um, if you want to be a hobbit in Lord of the Rings, there's Lord of the Rings RPG. So they're not broadly trying to compete within the tabletop industry. They're just catering to a very specific audience. I don't have that. So if you can find it, just a more specific, not for my game, but if you can find a more specific niche, you'll probably find more success than trying to go up against industry giants while starting from scratch.
Yeah, that might be an interesting thing for you to explore because I do know I was the answer I was hoping to get because I've gotten to playtest your game and I know about it. Is I do know that you one of the things you're dissatisfied with in D&D is in terms of like the level of risk and kind of consequence doesn't feel as consequential as it should. So I do feel like that's one unique aspect that you brought into the game. So it may be pulling back from it and finding, what are those unique pivot points so that you can find the niche within the larger niche of the D&D community, because there are probably people that have the same feelings that you have that kind of pushed you in the direction to create some of the mechanical changes. Scott Shepper, who I talk about a lot, who's the Zettelkasten guy, he also does a lot with marketing within the group that I'm a part of. And he'll talk about forking a community, which I know is an idea that comes from someone else, but I forget who the reference was. But it's basically you have one way to kind of split off and do your own thing is you have this larger community and then you find the sub niche within that community that you then split off. So like Zettelkasten, if you go look it up online, it's a lot of people obsessed with Rome and Obsidian and all of this digital PKM. And what Scott Shepard did was fork it off to the people that are really focused on analog, which is the original way that Zettelkasten was supposed to be done. It's actually the way that's supported by science, because when we handwrite something, it goes into our brain a whole lot differently than it does when we type it. So he took this existing community and then forked off a small piece of it, but using that 1,000 true fans model that comes from Derek Shivers, something like that. Probably not Shivers. I forget the guy's last name, but the 1,000 true fans model, which Seth Godin also talks about. So if you find those unique, distinct differences, and then you fork the D&D community into, if you like D&D, but you're slightly unsatisfied with this part of it, you might want to try this game. It could be interesting to tease out those pieces. Okay, I didn't know if you had a reaction to that. Just a lot of nodding. All right, so through the work that you've done over all the years, you kind of alluded to bringing in that more life connection part of it. So going beyond gaming, which is something we've done in our martial arts school. One of our taglines is more than just the martial arts, because there is so much more than the punching and kicking. John Tanaka, who I've interviewed on this podcast before and is a mutual friend in the TTRPG space, his podcast is all about being your best self through gaming, discovering your best self through gaming. So through the work that you've done over the years, what are some of your favorite stories about transformations you've seen or connections that you've helped people make to better their life by making those connections to how maybe their obsession with video games can actually inform and benefit their real life rather than just being a distraction from it?
So one of the things that I see most often, and it's more often than I would expect, are people who are messaging to talk about how the channel has impacted their lives. Usually, it's something in the vein of, you've kind of just made me more aware of how I'm behaving or how I'm moving through life. Because again, like a lot of my videos have a philosophical tone in that thoughts on better gaming series, but I think a more concrete example of the channel impacting somebody else's life is that I'll get some get messages from people talking about how they've created their own channel because they were inspired by the things that I've done. Essentially, willing to start from scratch. One person in particular, ended up creating a channel um, that eventually netted them a job at Adobe, working on um, I can't remember specifically what they were doing, but that's something that they wouldn't have otherwise. Uh, I don't want to say stumbled into, but it seems like they were very appreciative of what they saw, learned, or just being a part of like the channel's community. That it helped fuel something inside of them that pushed them forward. So I think that just if you have something to contribute to the world, not just the clickbaity, I want to make money by my stuff videos, then you can have uh, impacts on people that you don't even realize is taking place or are taking place in the background.
Yeah, looking at the channel, the topics on the thoughts on better gaming are is like escapism and hope and mitigating frustration, unending practice. So these are all definitely things that correlate to our day-to-day life and can be challenging and hard to figure out how to do, especially when you're trying to do it with hard things. So making that connection to people, that skills that they're developing within the video game can then be translated into their real life, is super beneficial. And then I think the other part of it is you're kind of being a role model for the good that you can do on YouTube rather than just again adding to the din of just all the dopamine candy that's out there, the garbage that's out there. You can create an impact on YouTube. And there is a lot of that out there. Not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's an unfortunately smaller percentage than all of the clickbaity type stuff that you normally find. All right, so now we're going to jump into our not so rapid fire questions for the end here. So my first question for you is if what should someone look for in or hold on, let me try that one more time. So what should people look for in someone who does what you do, or more specifically towards what you are doing right now? If someone's interested in trying out an indie game, like a role-playing game, especially specifically tabletop role-playing, what should they look for to know whether or not it's worthwhile to invest their time, their energy, and potentially their money in something that's unknown? So especially if you have someone like right now, this year was kind of a mess. For the early part of the year was a bit of a mess for D&D, which did create the opening for a lot of these new games to come out because there was some silly things that they did, which we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But with this kind of deluge of new games coming out, how can people be more discerning about what games are worth trying?
So while I am still in the process of figuring out what the underlying themes and maybe goal of the game is, if you could find that in the other TTRPGs, some people feel very strongly about certain mechanics, or they're feeling very strongly about a certain theme, then maybe it's worth exploration. The unfortunate thing is that a lot of TTRPG systems can be quite hefty if they're um, more traditional, like Dungeons and Dragons style. But there's also a lot of lightweight RPGs out there as well, where they're referred to as rules light. Um, usually have a slimmer book and have more interpretation from the GM or the game master and how those rules are adjudicated. But if you're just looking for something fun to play with friends, picking up something uh, to that or something like that might be worth dipping your toes into. A lot of people learned about tabletop role playing games in general because of D&D, but it is so that's there's so much more out there. So by virtue of exploring, hopefully you'll start to get a feel for what is and may not be worth your time.
All right, next question. What is one thing that you would suggest to our listeners that they can apply in their life today? And this is a very broad question from across your entrepreneurial journey, your entrepreneurial teaching journey. But what's one thing that our listeners could apply in their lives today?
Set release dates. So I yeah, I know. That sounds very specific, but, maybe the real life analog, if you don't have you're not putting out videos or, updates or whatever, is scheduling your time. That is something that I personally am not good at, but what I can do is put a target date on a calendar and know that I need to get something done before then. So sometimes that might be like last minute procrastination, but a lot of times it at least frames the amount of time that you have to get to the end goal. And uh, if you have a community that is following you, setting their expectations for when something will be made available to them is super important because it allows them to not only plan around that particular day, but also start getting excited, start asking questions about what's coming. And then if you miss it, it is so much better to ask for forgiveness and push the date back than it is for them to not have an idea of what the date is at all. And the reason for it is let's pretend that Christmas is like we're all expecting it the same day. We're told that it's gonna happen, and then got pushed back because Santa, maybe Vixen's in the hospital or whatever. Uh, it's gonna be pushed back a week. People would be like, "Okay, that's really disappointing, but at least we know, what's going on." So there's just a level of communication there that I think people will appreciate more than they'll be upset about. I know this is supposed to be a lightning round. I'm so sorry.
No, they're not quite lightning round questions. You can't really answer them in one sentence. So that's why I've been saying not so rapid fire. But I think you actually hit on two really big things in there. So the first is committing to deadlines, which as an entrepreneur, you are your own boss. And it is very easy for just the day to leech away. So creating deadlines and then committing yourself to finishing them, that discipline is super duper important. And then the other piece that can be pulled out of everything you just said is the communication, setting clear expectations. There's a quote I love that all frustration comes from unmet expectations. So if you haven't communicated to your team, to your kids, to your spouse, to your friends, to your community, what to expect, then that's going to leave them with a whole bunch of frustrating open loops in their head. So the more that you can communicate to the people that you're serving, whether you're in a corporation, leading a team, or you're a subordinate to a supervisor, the more that you can create communication and let people know where you're at, what you're working on, what your situation is, it's going to make it that much easier to keep people from getting frustrated, including yourself. And then obviously, if you start setting deadlines and missing them, now that is telling you something about either your ability to discipline yourself, or it may just be telling you that you need to budget more time in your calendar. You may have expectations that are too high in terms of how much you can get done in a period of time, and it will help you better calibrate. So now you're not under as much stress and pressure because you're setting deadlines that are unrealistic. All right. So, final, well, almost second to last question. What's the most valuable lesson that you've learned through your entrepreneurial teaching journey?
Uh, be professional, but not impersonal. I so this is definitely a double edged sword. I really like to communicate with, or rather, back when I was working on Planetside 2, I really liked being very clear and candid with what was going on in the game. Whether it's just delays or what's coming up next or what we're thinking about, um, changing or creating that sort of thing. Um, and there was always a level of appreciation for that. However, I've said so many stupid things, and internet doesn't forget about that. And regardless of trying to make amends, um, I think that there's still a level of holding on to stuff that has been said or that was disagreeable in the past, or maybe just stuff that was favorable at the time, but opinions have kind of circled back around and are now going the other direction. Uh, if people change, life changes. I don't know, their opinions change. But anyway, the professional comes in, or the professionalism comes in when you can avoid, I think, being too petty is maybe petty is the right word.
I think it
I
is.
want to say that's not the case, but yeah, no, it happens a lot, where you have to be kind of like almost a one layer removed from the community. You can't just be, mired in all the stuff that they are. You can't be them, because you have more responsibility. So you have to remove yourself just a little bit, but keep your personality intact, hopefully, you know, unless your personality is saying stupid stuff, which in my case has happened a lot. But so learning that, how to walk that tightrope is probably the most valuable lesson that I've pained myself to learn and am still practicing throughout the past, 7+ years of just being a community figurehead slash developer slash person who has a big mouth online.
Authenticity is massively important to building a community and an audience. And I mean, you can do it by being some sort of caricature as well. But I think for people that are looking to be entrepreneurial teachers, they're looking to put their true heart into it. And it is challenging to 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 be yourself, but also understand when it's time to put on a particular filter or to emphasize, because I feel that a lot. I always feel like myself, but at the same time, I'm not always completely relaxed into myself. If I were completely relaxed, there'd be a lot more "that's what she said" jokes or F bombs, in the podcast. But that's not the me that I need to show up as for this particular situation to best serve the people that I'm serving. So I think it's authentically showing up true to your values while also respecting the people that are around you, which includes your team and your brand, and everything that you represent within the work that you're doing. So yeah, no, that's a really important lesson to learn, and something that's more like kind of a dialing in the focus on an old fashioned camera that doesn't do it for you, where you're gonna kind of miss it every once in a while, and it's just learning to hone in on the clarity of who you need to be in that moment and how you need to show up. So now the final question, the most important one: how can people connect with you and find out what you do?
If you want to send me a message, I guess you can do so on Twitter. Sorry, formerly Twitter.
I
Slight
refuse.
disgust. Yeah, exactly. Me too. At Rel Plays. If you want to check out the TTRPG currently in development, you can visit playdisrpg.com or distalrpg.com for those of us who are less fun. Uh, and yeah, if you want to check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/warpathrel. Again, all the links will be in the show notes, but feel free to let me know what's up.
Awesome. And then yeah, the links will definitely be in there, but just to remind everyone, Wrel is WREL. And that is all we have time to talk about today. So thank you very much for joining me, Michael. And of course, as always, keep being you. You're doing awesome creative stuff in the world.
Thanks for having me.